In the previous chapter, we focused on individual choices and individual traits. The crime was the product of a rational decision made after weighing the benefits and costs, or that it was the result of an individual trait that the offender possessed. But these views fail to account for the consistent social patterns in the crime rate, that being that crime rates are much higher in the poorest of inner city areas. If crime was the result of an individual choice or trait, then it follows that crime would be spread more equally across the country, but that's not the case. In this chapter, we will discuss and explore the social factors of crime, the social structure theories, socialization or social process theories, as well as the reaction theory and cultural conflict theory, along with reviewing how each of these theories plays a role in preventing crime. And there is this old saying, something to the effect that you can take the criminal out of a bad environment, but you can't take the bad environment out of the criminal. Although we don't necessarily believe this to be true, some suggest that negative influences of the social environment, especially things like poverty, lack of education, broken families, disorganized neighborhoods, episodes of discrimination and socialization into unproductive values, predisposes certain people to live lives of crime, and that such negative influences change. Central to this perspective is the idea that crime is a social phenomena, and central to any understanding of crime is the role that society, social institutions, and social processes play in its development and control. Now, consider the story that the chapter begins with about the former Patriot player, Aaron Hernandez, who at 22 years old signed a $40 million contract with the New England Patriots. He had grown up in a bad neighborhood. He hung out with a rough crowd. He lived in poverty. He was part of a gang, but his athletic ability was phenomenal, which landed him at a college, University of Florida, to play football. He did have some troubles in college. He was involved in fighting and used drugs. In 2013, after he was part of the Patriots, he was charged and later convicted of killing his fiancée, sister's boyfriend, Odin Lloyd. The motives prosecutors put forth was that Hernandez got mad because Lloyd was talking about a prior incident involving Hernandez killing two people over a disagreement. He was convicted. He was charged and convicted of killing Odin Lloyd. And he was also charged with the double homicide of the individuals as part of that discussion. He was ultimately acquitted of that. But in 2017, he hung himself in his jail cell, despite being acquitted of the double homicide, and his case involving Lloyd was on appeal. This is an example of somebody who was in a bad situation, living in a bad situation, poor economy, disorganized neighborhood, who became a football star, but nevertheless was caught up in trouble. As criminologists believe, if you grow up immersed in street culture, poverty, deteriorated neighborhoods, it is these social forces that influence one's behavior and causes crime. So keep this story in mind. We're going to revisit Mr. Hernandez. So let's talk about the stratified society. People in the United States live in a stratified society. Simply put, social stratification is the arrangement of different population groups into hierarchy type tiers that create dominant and subordinate groups within a society. Its basis and very essence consists in a unequal distribution of rights and privileges, duties and responsibilities, social values and social power, and influences among members of society. Within a stratified society, dominant social groups share increased advantages and privileges that the other social groups do not. This often means that those lesser groups must contest with hardship and equality that more dominant groups do not because of their higher placement on the social ladder. That's how the stratified society works. Social classes are segments of the population whose members have a relatively similar proportion of desirable things, who share attitudes, values, norms, and identifiable lifestyle. So let's talk about problems, the economic structure. I'm going to start with poverty. And I might skip around a little bit. That doesn't flow accurately with my slide, but my slide is like an outline. Poverty in the United States, and I believe we talked about this early on already this semester. Poverty in the United States is more prevalent now than it has been in the last 40 years. While it affects all ages and genders, race, and ethnic groups, poverty is the severest among young families, meaning families under 30. The federal poverty level is completely unrealistic. According to the federal poverty level, a family of 4 is at the poverty level when they make $24,000 a year. Nearly 7 million children live in extreme poverty, which means families of 4 are living less than $12,000 a year. 45% of American children are considered living in low-income families. Minority children, more likely than white children, are living in poverty. And living in poverty can have lifelong effects, including cognitive achievements, educational attainment, nutrition, physical and mental health issues, and social behavior. And also, children tend to lag behind. They're less likely to graduate from high school. And as a result, people on the lowest rung of the economic ladder have the greatest incentive to commit crimes. Minority group poverty, or let's just call it racial disparity, because there's a number of things that play a role. Racial disparity exists. It's social, it's economical disparities. These all take a toll on minorities. Minorities make significantly less money than Caucasians, which allows whites to have more advantages economically, socially, and politically. They call that white privilege. These advantages allow whites to live more comfortably in secure and protected areas. Minorities don't have these privileges. Also, they are forced to go to schools that are underfunded, deteriorated. They are less likely to graduate, which leads to unemployment, which is higher amongst African Americans. The criminal justice system routinely treats minority youth less favorably, potentially resulting in having a criminal record at an early age, which then affects them as they grow up and then they get into trouble. African Americans alone, by the way, big number, constitute nearly half of the country's prison population. The Black Lives Movement aims at eliminating institutional violence and perceived systemic racism towards African Americans. So keep these things in mind, these social factors, as we move forward and talk about the different social structure theories. There's 3 that we're going to talk about. So let's begin exploring these most prominent social theories of crime. And these are based on the effects that these social problems and these social relations have.